And hello, everybody. My name is Lena Fenton. I am a relationship and sex therapist. I have worked in the field of therapy since the early 90s. I more recently specialized in working with couples, but originally my work consisted of general counseling with a special focus, if you like, on adults who had been sexually abused as children, or indeed who had been sexually violated as adults. I also worked for one prison service, working amongst drug users. I worked for a women's charity, working with women who had been trafficked, tortured, enslaved, and so on, and also who had experienced domestic violence. I began my training, my specialism in 2010, training at the Tavistock in London, and completed it by doing a master's in sex therapy. So I've been, the bulk of my work now is working with couples and individuals who have intimacy issues of one form or another. I'm here again today to provide a free service for people who may be experiencing difficulties in their relationships whilst we're, various parts of the world, I'm in England, various parts of the world are experiencing various degrees of lockdown, quarantine, social isolation, and so on and so on. My last broadcast was on Tuesday when I talked about domestic violence or domestic abuse, and today I don't have a subject. I thought I would wait to see if anyone was going to join me to maybe put some questions to me, I hope, and then I can kind of talk a little bit about that. Alternatively, what I thought I would just maybe talk about is a little bit more about what I'm sitting with, which is, I think, something that a lot of people are thinking about at the moment, which is, what does the future hold for us? What is the long-term impact of this virus? Not in terms of how things are going to go badly wrong, but more in terms of how things might develop to change us, and I mean us, the whole human race, for the better. What kind of change is really being brought about? I feel like, what's happening at the moment are the seeds of a new world, really. And I think there's a phrase being bandied about, which is the new normal. And I don't think we're there yet. I think we're just really at the very beginning of whatever the new world order might be. And I know that sounds a little bit grandiose, and I don't mean to sound grandiose, but I do think that, what struck me really powerfully this week is that this coronavirus is happening all over the world. And I'm sorry if, again, it sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but I kind of want, I find myself asking myself, well, what does that then mean actually for us, the human race? What will be the lasting effects of this this pandemic, I guess, let alone what it might mean for relationships? Because I think that, we're all of us, I think, communicating much more on this kind of medium, this live video connection. And I wonder what that means for us as human beings. I wonder what it means for the world, because one of the things that I think it does is it removes frontiers, it removes boundaries. It stops us from thinking locally. It makes us think. It certainly makes me think much more globally. And I think this is something that has been developing anyway, in the way that we've traveled, travel so much easier nowadays. We can, holidays, we travel everywhere, basically. Gap years, holidays, all sorts of things, we commute different continents and, and so on and so forth. All things that we're all aware of. But I think this lockdown has taken us to a different it's a different paradigm somehow, and I'm just really wanting to think about and just cogitate a little bit on what that means for the way in which we relate, because in effect I have been working with people online over the video connection, but physically I'm alone. Yet mentally I'm kind of in touch with all sorts of people. And if you're watching this, you're in touch with me somehow. And yet I don't know, I just kind of want to put a question. This is because there's nobody asking me any questions. I'm just sharing with you what's kind of going through my mind. And I see that there's a couple of people who have joined me. Do by all means put something on the chat, on the live chat. Do by all means ask me questions that I might be able to comment on or answer even. But in the meantime, as I said, I was just kind of speculating and just sitting with a question in my mind. What does this means? This coronavirus situation? What does this mean for the human race as a whole? Not just now, but in the months and years to come. What will we have learned? What will develop out of this? And thinking about it positively, I know there's an awful lot of fear mongering in terms of economic collapse and so many deaths and so on. But I'm wondering if we can think about what it means for relationships, because if nothing else, right now we're getting very used to not having physical contact. And yet I've always been a great believer that human beings fundamentally, like most warm-blooded creatures on this planet, need actual physical body-to-body contact. And we're not getting very much of that. And what does that mean right now? And if we get used to that, how does that change us in some way? How do we evolve, if you like, from here? Does it have an impact on how we evolve? For instance, is it possible that we evolve better mental connection capacities? I'm not saying telepathy, but maybe a better way of communicating over distance in some way. I don't know. I'm just kind of playing around with ideas a little bit in my head. But I'm also thinking about, the opposite side of that is relationships where people are actually forced, in a sense, to be together for much longer periods of time than we would ever have been used to, really. So we are constrained to be with certain people, family members, people that we share our homes or lodgings with, for continuous days and weeks. And what does that do? How does that impact and affect us individually and communally? Because actually this virus is really forcing us apart in many ways and forcing us together in many ways, that none of which has ever been known really on this planet, actually. So it's something very different and very new, and I'm just trying to think, psychologically, maybe even spiritually, what does that mean for us human beings? How do you manage to be with somebody 24/7? How do you, how does that work in terms of just being together? I don't think, for instance, one example that comes to mind is, generally speaking, we're not used to being together in silence. And often people find silence disturbing, like there's something wrong. So if you're in somebody's company, you're supposed to have some kind of conversation, communication and such. And silence might be felt a little bit threatening, for instance. So but if you spend 24/7 with somebody, you kind of inevitably are going to run out of things to say, or you might just need to just be with your own thoughts and your own feelings for a while, away from other people. Even if they're people like maybe your children whom you love dearly, or your parents, or your spouse, whichever it is. Human beings, I believe, need solitude as much as they need companionship. I think these are, there's a struggle within each of us in trying to find the right balance between those two needs within ourselves. And I think that I'm saying individually we need that, but I think also as a society we tend to need that. And as a world, each individual in however many billions there are on this planet need a bit of both. And when we're forced to do one or the other excessively, I think it puts us in a great deal of difficulty. And I just, that one issue alone, I think, currently is causing a lot of stress in various homes throughout the various lands, basically. So what I'd like to, one piece of advice that I'd like to offer is to instigate, to put into place a system of open and closed, so that it's agreed that everybody needs some time on their own, and that they can actually then signal to the other people in the house, or signal to your partner, that actually I need a bit of space. I just want to be maybe in a room by myself. Give yourself an amount of time. Let's say, I don't know, it's half an hour, where you can just read or listen to music, or just be with whatever your thoughts happen to be today, whatever emotions you happen to feel. Just to be alone with your own thoughts and feelings might be really important for good mental health, a good balance in your mental health. Equally, you might need some time when you actually feel really connected to another human being, and that neither of those states are wrong. And that's a conversation that I think is important to have in any lockdown situation that you might be in, to have a conversation with those in your household about how you negotiate time alone, time together, connecting, disconnecting, and so on, and that neither of those states are per se wrong, so that people shouldn't feel rejected when you say, actually, right now I'm really closed and I need some space to be by myself, to be with my own thoughts, with my own feelings. But equally, that each individual is able to say, I actually really need a bit of real connection with you. Can we just spend some time together, just being together? It doesn't need, connecting doesn't necessarily need words. Connecting can be just sitting quietly together, maybe holding hands, maybe not. It can mean sex too, of course. But again, these are things that, in an adult relationship, we learn to negotiate. We learn to negotiate our needs, and we learn to negotiate around meeting other people's needs. And that's part of what growing up is about, what learning to social skills is about. It's about negotiating your needs versus somebody else's needs, and how you provide for both of those possibilities. It's also, I mean, I think that as well as negotiation, I think it's self-care effectively. Being able to anticipate that you're going to need some time by yourself, being able to anticipate that you're going to need some time for connection, some time for intimacy, and so on and so forth. Just in the same way as you anticipate that you're going to need to eat, for instance, or you're going to need to get washed and cleaned and so on. You know that those needs are going to reoccur. And in the same way, I think that we should be thinking about our emotional needs, and how they reoccur, and how there is a wave, if you like, or a cycle, if better. So someone's just come in with a question. I'm just going to read what that question is. So the question is, do you think that online communication can be as effective as in-person contact? I think the simple answer is yes, I do think that it can be as effective. Because I think that the way we connect isn't always physical. I think that the way we connect often is mental and emotional, and perhaps even spiritual, if you're open to that aspect of yourself. So I think it can be. I think that if you have a physical presence, there is an added dimension to the connection, but otherwise I think you can definitely connect to other people, to each other, virtually. We do it over the phone very well when we have just kind of voice calls, but I think it's even more potent when we have voice and visual connection, or visual access to each other. So yes, I do. Given, yeah, I mean, that's the simple question. The only disadvantage I would say there is to online communication is that I want to tell you a story. I knew somebody once, many years ago now, that developed a relationship online with somebody. And after some months, because they lived in different continents, they decided to meet. And what happened was that the physical presence of the other person actually felt, the experience, the physical experience of the other person actually felt wrong. And so that relationship didn't proceed. And I think the reason why that happens is because when we connect online, we have we kind of construct in our own minds what that person is going to feel like, if that makes sense, because we don't have that immediate physical experience. And so we kind of make it up almost, but I think that's a kind of semi-conscious event. So when you come to the real meeting, then it feels different. The visceral physical experience does not sometimes match your the mind's experience, if that makes sense. So that would be the only, I think, maybe disadvantage if you've met somebody online and you connect, that when you then meet physically, it's a very different matter, because meeting just online gives the imagination scope, which you don't have if you're meeting in person. Now, if you've already met the person in person and then you meet online, I think that that's a better possibility, a better connection, perhaps. So because then you have the memory of the physical experience, which you can bring into the virtual experience. So that's that. I don't know if that was helpful, if that answered your question. What else? So okay, so I started this conversation by talking about where this leads us, and I guess that this question kind of very much works into that, doesn't it? Because it's like, will we, can we foresee a future where we meet people online, we connect with them online, and perhaps never actually have a physical relationship, that relationships become virtual in their entirety? Because of course you can have virtual sex, you can have virtual almost anything, as we've seen by the way in which we are now beginning to experience life during lockdown. We're now beginning to experience, people are having dinner parties online, people are doing choirs online. I had a lovely video sent to me of a choir that was singing. We've seen artists perform online together at the same time. There is so much that we're now doing online that I think probably will remain with us into the future. Even though, that we didn't have 6 months ago, nobody would have even considered doing such a thing. And yet here we are doing most things online: learning, training, conversations, relationships. So much is done virtually that I wonder how much of that will stay with us, and what that will mean in terms of how we develop. One of the things that I learned about and I use in my work is attachment styles. And just to kind of describe that very briefly, there is secure attachment, which the majority of people have, and then there are two or three forms of insecure attachment. One is called avoidant or dismissive attachment, and another one is called preoccupied anxious attachment. Now, and there's also another one which I can't remember. It's not the one that's relevant to the virtual communication is the avoidant attachment, because the avoidant attachment style is where a person struggles to have too much intimacy, and they're a little bit like they're a little bit too self-sufficient. They're a little bit like an island, and they can only tolerate very small amounts of real closeness, real emotional and physical intimacy, or certainly emotional connection and intimacy is the capacity for it is limited. And I think that would suit very well somebody. So virtual communications, as we're having now, would suit very well somebody with an avoidant attachment style. But what I'm now thinking is, are we, if this fashion continues, if this new development continues, are we all likely to develop much more avoidant attachment styles, so that our attachment is virtual and not actual or physical? Again, it will lack that other dimension that I mentioned earlier. So that's one maybe possible vision of the future, where attachment is much less visceral meaning to do with the viscera of the body, the actual feeling, physical experience of the body in the presence of another person. So that's just an interesting something to think about. There are lots of different ways that we communicate now. There are also lots of different platforms, all having slightly different feelings to them as well. And the other thing that I want to bring in here is this idea of kind of the capacity. For instance, we know that certainly for younger people that have been brought up with the internet, their capacity for multiple attention simultaneously is very strong. What does that mean for the way that the human might develop again into the future? Because we're accustomed, certainly from the past, where one's attention is fully in one thing in the present moment. That is no longer the case. What is the human of the future going to be like if that's so. And what does it mean in terms of attachment? Because even now, you know, we often see, and I've observed it many times, if I've gone into restaurants or cafes, you'll get a couple sitting together, and they're sitting together, but they're not talking to each other. They're not looking at each other. They're not relating, if you like, because they're on their phones, either putting something on Facebook or responding to a friend's text or doing something. So how much presence do we have when we're in that situation? Because although we're physically there, we're not mentally and emotionally there. So it kind of breaks down into various components and fragments, the idea of being present to each other. And yet I know that from my own work and my own study, how important it is, for instance, to a small child, to a newborn child, you know, that the mother is, or the caregiver, I don't mean to imply that only mothers do that, but the caregiver, whoever that happens to be in the moment, is fully present to the child. The child is always seeking to find the eyes and look deeply into you and connect with you. How does that change, for instance? Does it change? Is there some damage that could come from that? Or is there going to be a different way of being where our focus is much broader than one-on-one kind of focus? These are huge questions, and I don't have any answers, but in the absence of anybody else asking questions, I wanted to share with you what I've been with these last few days and weeks since we've been in lockdown. You know, how will the human race change as a result of this? Because I think this is, you know, it now is, we know now that it's quite universal. It's not just certain countries, it's not just certain types. You know, there's been some ridiculous notions as to, you know, whether certain people will get it and others won't, according to race or heat, or I don't know. The fact is, we now know that this is kind of a universal virus and it's affecting the whole of the human race. So my big question is, can we allow ourselves to think and imagine a better future in terms of how the human being evolves from here on forwards? And this is obviously not something I have any answers for, but I think it's important to allow ourselves to imagine bigger, better for the whole of the human race. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this broadcast today, and I will be back here at 3:30 on Tuesday and Thursday next week. I look forward to hearing some more or seeing some more of your questions. Bye-bye for now.